Mishnah Tainus tells us, Lo Hoyom Tovin Yisrael, there were no greater holidays for Klal Yisrael other than Chamisha Asar Av, V'Yom Kippurim, the 15th of Av, which is Tu B'Av, which is today, which is a semi-Yom Tiv, a holiday, and Yom Kippurim. So Morris asks, Yom Kippur, we understand, it's Yom Slicha V'Kapora. It's the greatest day of the year. Here we have this endless debt, and we're relieved from the debt. L'fnei Hashem Titoru. Not only do we relieve ourselves from the debt, we're forgiven, and we achieve a level of purity. But what's so special about Tu B'Av, the 15th of Av? So there are a number of reasons given in the Gemara, which the Gemara says, we find that when the daughters of Tzlofchad came and they claimed that they should have a share in the land because their father only had daughters, and Hashem says they're right, and they do have a daughter as an heir. So later, the other tribes came and said, but it's a problem. What's the problem? Because if they get a share in the land of their tribe, what happens if they marry a man, and then afterwards they have children, and they should pass away, so their children are heirs of their mother, and the children of another tribes. As a result of this, it minimizes the portion of the tribe. So Hashem says that the daughters of Tzlofchad, they should only marry of their own tribe, and each tribe should only marry of their own tribe, because it will minimize the portions of each of the tribes, because otherwise you're going to have this crossover. So this was only in effect only that particular generation, but there was a time later where Hashem allowed the tribes to intermarry. So it was Yom Shehutru, Shvatim Lov Zeh B'Zeh. It was time that the tribes were permitted to intermarry among themselves. It wasn't limited to each one's own tribe. Years ago I heard the name of Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, Zech Tzadok Livrocha. He had said, what was the whole idea of, initially they were limited besides the portion, and then they were permitted to intermarry, that each of the Shvatim had certain unique characteristics. Each one had, as Yaakov Avinu identified each one, what were their strengths, spirituality speaking, and how it relates to the material, and he gave the bracha based on that. So those characteristics had to be set in place, but once they were set in place, now when they intermarry, each tribe is sharing that characteristic with the other tribe. So here we're coalescing all the special qualities of Klal Yisrael are being coalesced with one another, and as a result of this, all Klal Yisrael has the special qualities and abilities of each other tribe. So until one point that had to be solidified. Once it was solidified, then they were permitted to marry among themselves, meaning intermingle with one another to bring this about. So Yom, the day that they were permitted to marry within one another, that's the basis for the holiday. Another reason given, we read, the Rambam says that one of the tragedies that took place on Tisha B'Av was Haruge Beitar. The Romans, they came and they destroyed the Beitar community, which were about 1 million people, and the Rambam, in the words of the Rambam, that the destruction of Beitar was kosher kechur beis hamikdash. It was the equivalent of destruction of the temple. That's how serious it was. So what did the Romans do to demoralize the Jews? They actually piled the bodies for miles throughout the countryside, piled them like 12 feet high, and they decreed that they cannot be buried. So usually if you have the bodies, they decompose, you have scavengers, they come and they take up the bodies. There was a ness. The ness was they did not decompose, and also the scavengers did not take the bodies. The bodies remained intact. So what happened to Tu B'Av? Tu B'Av, the decree was annulled, and the Jews were allowed to bury their dead. As a result of this, that's why it's the great holiday. So the Gemara says, as a result of that, Osa Yom Shenidu Harugi Beitla Kfura Tiknu Beyavne Hatov HaMeitiv. It's a little complicated. It's halacha that if a person has a better quality wine, and he wasn't, when he said the first Bar Pri Agefen, he did not know that he'd have the other wine, and it was brought there, he has to say Bracha Hatov HaMeitiv. What's Hatov HaMeitiv on the other wine? Hatov HaMeitiv Hatov shel. Firstly, we're giving thanks to Hashem that they didn't decompose. The bodies did not decompose. Hameitiv shenitlu l'kfura. That the Romans, the decree was annulled, we were able to bury them. On a Torah level, a Jew has to have in-ground burial. It says cover tikberenu, it's a mitzvah d'oraisa to bury the dead. So therefore, as a result of this, that's why it was what? It was a yom, it was considered a holiday, and the greatest of the holidays. Rabbi of Yosef Damri Tava Yom Sheposkim Lichros Eitzim Lamarocha, that there was during up to a certain point, because of the intensity of the sun, they would actually deworm the wood. If the wood has a worm in it, it doesn't qualify to go on the mizbeach, because they had to bring a number of times every day, a certain amount of wood for the korbanos. It says Eish Tomit Tukadbo, it's mitzvah d'oraisa. If the wood is wormy, it's not qualified. So they would deworm the wood up to a certain point when the sun was at its hottest time, so the wood was not subject, they didn't have the moisture to be able to deworm. After this period of time, they could no longer, it had no value because there was the moisture, because it wasn't as hot. So because so simple the understanding is they had dewormed enough wood that they had wood for the whole year, for the Atzei Me'arocha, for the Mizbeach. However, there's a famous Rabbeinu Gershom in Bava Basra. He says the family that dewormed the wood, it took a substantial amount of time every day, and they weren't able to study Torah. So when they came to the point where they weren't able to deworm it, they were able to get back to the Torah study. So because they were able to learn more intensely, and they had a greater degree of time available to learn Torah, this was a simcha for Klal Yisrael that they were able to get back to learning. That was the simcha. It wasn't that they had enough wood because they accomplished what they had to, but rather because they weren't preoccupied any longer. This was a simcha for Klal Yisrael. That's the other reason given. And therefore, it's Yom. This is Lo Yom Tov Yisrael Ketubov. Now, also another reason given Bava Basra is Kol Meisi Midbar. Every year, over the 40-year period, 39-year period, because of the Meraglim, the Jews, anybody between the age of 60, they would die. They would dig mass graves, and they would all go into the grave, and they'd go to sleep, and in the morning, they would blow the trumpets, and they would say, Yibodlu Achayim Min HaMeisim, let the living separate from the dead, and those who were meant to die remained in them, they would cover them up. This is what they would do every year. The last year, they all went, they blew the trumpets, everybody came out alive. So because it was Kol Meisi Midbar, they came to a point where everyone finished dying and the decree was complete. Therefore, this is why it's such a great Yom Tov. Kol Meisi Midbar. What was it? We find that Moshe Rabbeinu did not prophesy continuously because Jews, they were depressed. Every year they knew, nobody knew if he would die and not die. So what was the simcha? Not they just finished dying, because now the level of relationship between Klaus and HaKadosh Baruch Hu was a new level. It's because the Gemara says that Shechina is only shor mitoch simcha, not mitoch atzvos. A person is in a state of melancholy, he's not the receptacle for the Shechina. And since Klal Yisrael, Moshe Rabbeinu's level of nevuah, of prophecy, was only in the merit of Klal Yisrael. So since they themselves were depressed because of their situation, as a result of this, therefore it became a Yom Tov. Now it's a new level of relationship. And every one of these situations, Harugi Beitar, if people every day are confronted, they see the endless corpses and how they disgrace our corpses, we can't escape it. And therefore it's depression. And again, Shechin is not shor mitoch atzvos. Even today, a person's state of melancholy, it interferes with his avodas Hashem. A person's vulnerable to all the machinations of the Yetzer Hara when a person's down. A person's up and he feels confident, he feels strong, you're able to actually weather every storm. Otherwise, you can't. So therefore, this day was the day we regained our inner confidence and our strength and our belief and our seeing the so-called the light at the end of the tunnel. Therefore, it's a Yom Tiv, one of the greatest of all.